Hello again guys, and welcome back to another Big Al Devlin video, and today we're going to be looking at the continued discussion on Britannic paganism and at the specific topic of the piskies. Now, the term piskie is an Old English term used to describe a group of mythological creatures, if you wish, that ancient pagans and modern day pagans believe in. However, the term piskie is in its own right not the oldest word to describe who the piskies were. And in this video and in future videos, as this is quite a broad subject matter and so will require a number of videos to give real justice to, we will be looking at who the piskies were, where they came from, where they lived and what they got up to, and we'll be looking at specific examples of piskies also. Now, as I said, piskie, even though that in its own right is a very old term to describe what most people today would know as either pixies, fairies or the little people, it itself is not the original term to describe who or what the piskies were. One of the oldest terms used to describe the piskies is the Irish she, which is ancient Irish for the people of the mounds. Now, the reason why they were called this was that it was believed that the piskies, or the Irish, lived and came from within the mounds, or the ancient mounds that existed in Ireland at the time. Now, how these piskies found themselves to be living within and coming from these mounds is a story that we'll look at now. Now, to understand why the piskies lived within these mounds, these ancient mounds found within Ireland, we must first of all understand how they first got there, because of course the interesting thing to note is that the piskies weren't always confined to the mounds and other sacred fairy rings, if you wish, and other sacred sites of the fairies. In fact, prior to them being described as the Irish, they in fact lived all over Ireland without constraint. So why did the piskies, or the Irish, become restricted to the mounds and the fairy sites that exist all over Britain? Well, it is believed that the piskies, or the fairies, were in fact the descendants of the Tuatha De Danann. Now, the Tuatha De Danann were the original pre-Celtic inhabitants of Ireland. And so, as you can imagine, this was a very ancient group of people that existed within Ireland before it was Celtic, or how we would describe as pagan. It was pre-Celtic. It was an incredibly old period of time within Ireland. However, these people were not seen as being truly human. In fact, they were very much a human in appearance and in size, which is the most important point about this video, is that piskies, pixies, fairies, the little people, the Tuatha De Danann, or the Irish, whatever you want to call them, were in fact not little people, but were of human size and human appearance. This is a common misconception, to see them as being diminutive beings. They were not. They were of human size. However, even though they were of our size and our appearance, as I said, they weren't quite human. They were something else, something potentially greater, if you wish to describe it as that. For they were the transitional group of individuals who were between both the spirit and the material realm in equal amounts. The gods and other spirits and spiritual creatures and beings were completely of the spirit realms. Ourselves, men, were completely of the material realms. That did not mean that spiritual beings couldn't interact with the material realm, and material beings like ourselves couldn't visit or interact with the spiritual realm. Of course, there were interactions, but those interactions were restricted through, ultimately, I suppose, a primitive version of the law of physics. Water and oil do not mix. It's very hard, and it's almost like that with the spirit and the material realm. However, the piskies, the Ayashi, the descendants of the Tuatha De Danann, were of both material and the spirit worlds. In fact, they're described in ancient stories as gods, but not as gods. A perfect description to term this group of individuals who were more than us, but not quite all the way to gods. As I say, a transitional element between us and the gods themselves. They were something in between. Now, the Tuatha De Danann, as I said earlier, were the original inhabitants of Ireland, and at that point, Ireland was their, in essence, or Britannia as a whole in many respects, but we look at specifically Ireland, as being their empire, their realm. But then the Milesians, which is a group of essentially Celtic individuals who came from Iberia, which is ancient Spain ultimately, invaded and conquered Ireland. And that's something that happened historically. And the original people, the Tuatha De Danann, again, historically existed, were seen to have come under essentially a term of surrender to the Milesians. And part of that surrender was that they would retreat and keep to the underground mounds that existed within Ireland at the time. Now, these mounds are believed historically to have been the original forts and fortification sites of the Tuatha De Danann before they got invaded by the Milesians. However, obviously within pagan myth, this became then the fairy mounds. Now, what is more likely is that the original human inhabitants, at least, of Ireland, the Tuatha De Danann as we describe them, were, yes, beaten and subjugated by the Celtic invaders, but then obviously would have married in and co-inhabited with the Milesians, and to the point where then they, as a pure people, would have been bred out essentially and would have mixed completely with the Milesians, creating the modern day Irish people. However, this is the origin of the belief of where piskies, fairies, so on and so forth came from. It is the descendants, the surviving descendants of the Tuatha De Danann who inhabit the mounds in which they retreated to. Now, one way to look at it is, yes, the human inhabitants may have indeed been subjugated by the invaders, but the non-human inhabitants, that is the spirits of the lands, or even the gods of the Tuatha De Danann, retreated away from these invading Celtic gods and their peoples, essentially. And in fact, as a result, the Tuatha De Danann, or the Ayashi, as I should be more specific here, the Ayashi are in fact the original gods of the pre-Celtic people. Another group of pagan deities, just not of the Celtic variant. And so, as you can see, calling them the little people, in many respects, I suppose, is a derogatory term. Something that we should not use, but even I am guilty of from time to time, because of course it's language, it's a way of communicating between ourselves, and it is the term that most modern people would use to describe them in modern times. However, as I say, perhaps greater respect should be shown to these, essentially what I believe to be an ancient pantheon of god-like beings. As I say, gods, but not of the gods. Okay, gods that existed purely within this material realm, and now also within a specific part of the other realm. And this is what the mounds represent. They represent entry points into this other realm where only the descendants of Tuatha De Danann and their gods can exist within. For within this space, who knows where it is? Who knows what it comprises of? But it is most likely a spiritual aspect within the material realm. And so the only ones who can live there, of course, would be the piskies themselves, the Ayashi, because they are of material and spiritual at the same time. And this is what allows them to freely move from this other realm that they exist with, mostly within, to then our own realms, where they cause often mischief and do a variety of, interact with us in a variety of different ways. But we never hear the stories of how the Tuatha De Danann actually may also interact with the spiritual realms. And in fact, I do believe that that would be very much a possibility. If they can interact with our own realm, but of spiritual nature, then of course they should be able to interact also with the spiritual realm just as much as our own. And so you never know, maybe, just maybe, the pagan gods of the Celtic variant may also have stories of how these fairies also cause mischief within their own spiritual realms. Now, what I'll be doing in the next few videos is I'll be discussing the piskies, or the Ayashi. I'll need to think of a specific word to keep to describing them, but the Ayashi, I'll be discussing them more specifically. So I'll be going into more depth on that origin. I'll be going into and the discussions of that origin. Perhaps I'll be looking into the most interesting part, I suppose, of fairies that we know of in existence within Irish and Scottish myth, especially, such as the Banshee. Believe it or not, the Banshee was actually of the Ayashi. It's a fairy or piskie. And we'll look at all the different types that we know of and what they typically represented. And we'll think of some other topics as well to discuss about them. So I hope you enjoy this series that is upcoming within the series of Britannic Paganism. And I don't know when the next video will be or exactly what it will be, because I haven't got any plans for it at the moment, but it will come out as soon as possible. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you soon.